We've come here for the final session of the VVOJ Conference 2012, the second edition of the European Investigative Journalism Conference. And I'm really happy that the room is almost filled to capacity, because we have a very special closing session for you. I got my journalism degree at Stanford, and when I realized that the gentleman standing next to me is working at Stanford, I thought, I'll check him out, because somebody pointed him out to me, and I thought, I'll check him out. We have here a gentleman who has been working in the States and abroad. He's worked in France, he's worked for ABC News, he's worked for the New York Times, and he's then gone on as a Knight Fellow at Stanford. By the way, one of the best programs for journalists who are working. If you think you can learn a lot here, you can learn a lot there. Next to me is Mr. Geoff McGhee, who is the creative director at the Bill Lane Center for the American West. You all know it, of course, huh? Geoff, what is the Bill Lane Center for the American West?
It's an interdisciplinary teaching, research, and public engagement institute at Stanford University. And I'll tell you a little bit more about it, but thank you, Marco. Thank you very much. Thank you, VVOJ. Did I say that right? Talk you well. It's great to be here. I have to say this is the largest microphone cover I've ever spoken to in my life. I feel like I've just gotten a huge ice cream cone. This is what ice cream cones look like in the United States. Everything's bigger. All right, well, I know I'm the only thing that stands between you and beginning your weekend, so I will keep this long. I've got a lot of material, and probably some things are going to go by kind of fast. So I want to make sure that there's a way for me to get the slides in front of you if you want to look things up. They've all got links in them. But anyway, so what I'm here to talk about is not investigative journalism, which is good because I'm not a great investigative journalist, but I tremendously admire those of you who are, and I'm sure you all are. So what I'm going to talk about is how we take this medium, this, if you want to call it that, this form of visualizing information with graphic marks, and which is like almost in a sense saying doing everything except writing it in words, right? So something that doesn't use words, how do we communicate with it in a way that is just equally powerful or more powerful than expressing it verbally? So I'm going to show you a bunch of work. I'm going to show you some trends, I think, that are developing in terms of interface design and data visualization design. And I'm going to just play a little bit from the video that I did a couple years ago about data visualization and how it's changing some parts of the practice of journalism. So let's get started. Yes, the power of data visualization. Well, unfortunately, it'll be a little less powerful because the screen's a little small, but I hope everyone can see okay. So let's start it up. So what does this look like to everybody? Want to take any guesses? Yeah, but what's going on here? The gates of hell have opened. This is Sandy. Yeah, this is Hurricane Sandy. This is not a graphic that was created with the purpose of showing hurricanes. It's simply a added bonus. Interesting too. Look how calm things are out in the west. This is supposed to be the Saudi Arabia wind right here, right? This is an HTML canvas visualization that it's designed to work in modern browsers. It was done by Martin Wattenberg and Fernando Villegas, who work at Google now. They did this as an art project on the side. Just look at that. It's extraordinary. This is a perfect marriage of both a visualization that's very interesting in its own right. It takes government sensor data, wind speeds, and sort of the thing that it was born for, even though nobody realized it when they made it. This is the day that Sandy struck. But this is almost a science visualization. This is really a data visualization, right? What happens when you take this kind of scientific visualization and you apply it to something social science, like the US election? This is, probably all saw this on NewYorkTimes.com. I think everybody on the planet was pretty much using them as their, other than your publications, of course, as the go-to place for election results. And when they started doing this early in the night, I started wondering, well, even if Obama wins, the country could be all red, right? Because people were less enthusiastic this time around. People moved to the right. And there you have it. And here's one, just because it's so crazy, I just have to show it to you. This is 100,000 stars or more. I don't know, it feels like it's a lot more. This is our sun, and then this is our solar system, and then this is like the Oort cloud and Alpha Centauri, Milky Way, yes, and this is 3D. And I made this morning. No. Look how far out we are. You know, Belgium is really on the far end of this eastern spiral arm of the Milky Way. It's amazing. You guys are just in the middle of nowhere. What I love about this is that you never really get lost. As long as you pull this crank back and forth on the right, you're always going to end up at the sun. And it won't rush you. You won't be able to rush it. It actually makes you wait. Look at that. Ridiculous. That's the Google Creative Arts team, run by Aaron Koblin, the guy who first gave me this sort of hallucinogenic experience of data visualization that got me started in this world. He did a thing called flight patterns. I don't think that made it into this thing. All right, so basically, from what I understand, half our brain is devoted to processing visual information. And so we can quickly, I mean, there's all this talk about like pre-attentive awareness, that we see things, if they're graphically produced in the right way, we can see them before we even realize that we're seeing them. It's almost involuntary. Combine that with the amount of data that we have available in structured format, although, as investigators know, it's never the right data, right, or the right format. And we have these incredibly powerful machines, you know, even our phones now that are capable of drawing thousands of polygons, millions of polygons, like that 3D universe. Great. So how are we using data visualization? We're using it, of course, to just get around. In San Francisco, there's an app you can use to arbitrage different parking prices as they fluctuate throughout the day based on traffic and on density. We can predict airfares. We can find schools for our kids. All these things that, you know, they were either unknown, unknowable, or really difficult to find out, impractical. We're looking at ourselves as a society. We're doing visualizations of Twitter. Google is letting us explore public databases visually through Public Data Explorer. The US State Department has been trying to get a conversation going between American citizens and people living in other countries by sort of placing their opinions on dots. It looks a little bit like the universe, actually. Just small. N-grams. Google N-grams itself is not the most sophisticated visualization. It's just a couple of fever lines. It's comparing the frequency of terms as they occurred in every book written in the 20th century, let's say. I mean, it's incredible. It's because it's not the visualization itself. It's the fact that Google has gone and scanned every book they could get their hands on. And now you can see television and radio. And when they started, this is 1900 here. So here's radio. Written television. This, my wife is expecting our first child. Thank you very much. This is the baby name Voyager. Again, Martin Wattenberg, who you're going to meet shortly. He did this. His wife wrote a book on baby names. It's pretty cool in the U.S. I would love to see a world version of it. And of course, Hans Rosling and Gapminder showing how human societies have developed. New York Times did an interesting thing about people who came to America from all over the world. I did grow up in New Amsterdam, after all. Main categories of data viz. I want to get through this as quickly as I can. We have a lot to show. But I think there's a couple of major genres, and one of them is the kind that I think gets criticized, maybe unfairly, as being too abstract, too hard to understand. And I think it's because, in a sense, they're almost an exploration as much as a statement. Again, it's that idea that we're able to grasp information that was completely unknowable before. This is Eric Fisher. He worked in mobile for Google as an engineer. In his free time, he would do things like this. He would download GPS lat-long tags from Flickr photos, and he would plot where the photos were taken. Okay, all right, lots of people do that. People plot tweets. But the thing about tweets is oftentimes people will they'll just folklorically say where they're from. I'm from, you know, the Upper West Side, and then somebody tries to geocode that and put it on a map. You know, ends up with a bunch of dots just off of Africa at 0, 0 latitude. Anyway, what he did was he looked at every person who took pictures and then tried to examined how often they took pictures, where were the places that over a longer period of time they most often took pictures. And if it wasn't San Francisco in this case, then he would say that's a tourist. And if it was, then it was a local. And so locals' pictures were taken in blue. Down here in the Mission, in the cool parts, people go out to drink and eat. And here's Fisherman's Wharf, Alcatraz, Golden Gate Bridge. This is where the tourists were. Does this tell us something new? Well, no, not really. But it's actual evidence. We can know this now. We don't have to just think this. We can really prove it. This is also Flickr photos. This is also Martin Wattenberg and Fernando Viegas. This is every picture taken around the park in Boston, known as the Boston Common, and what the allocation of colors of the rainbow was to the different images by time of year. So we got a lot of snow, cloudy days. Baseball. Yes, we're going to talk about baseball. So this is they now have a system that tracks the flight of every pitch thrown in a Major League Baseball game. And they probably did that first, and then they're like, well, gosh, wouldn't it be cool to put this in front of people as they watch a live baseball game? And so you get this sort of video game style. This is everybody in the world saying good morning on Twitter, visualized by Jared Thorpe. I think I want to follow the stock market this way too. Sorry, it's just breaking up. I can't hear you. I don't know. There, you got me. All right, so that is, it's like a sketchbook in a sense. You know, sort of throw things on the wall, see what it looks like, and maybe you can start to make some insights from that. Then there's stuff that we already know. It's so obvious that why do we need to visualize it? Because there's something about taking this stuff that we've heard a million times or seen a million times, but there's something that visualization can do is make us think about it in a new way. And again, this is, geography challenged Americans. Maybe I'm the only one who's surprised that you could fit this many countries into Africa. After Inception, this one's not so surprising anymore, but I think Inception actually got the idea from this. How do you show both a sort of a perspective level view of a city, but also give a sense of the street grid? This is by Berg Design, a company in London. This looks similar, but this is something completely different. What if you used elevation to denote a data point instead of elevation? Of course, we've seen that before, but this is kind of fun because it's looking at crime trends. So what we have here, this is prostitution, and this is the Tenderloin area in downtown San Francisco. It's kind of a seedy area. The creator of this named this Mount Loin. Here you've got theft, drugs, stolen cars. So they tend to go further out into the sort of the suburbs, I think that this can actually create a sort of a conversation artifact. Like people think, wow, Mount Loin is a way to really get people thinking about crime rates in a way that just having a heat map or something doesn't. London Tube Map, there was a major breakthrough in graphic design, the idea that you didn't have to make a map about physical space, but you could make it more conceptual. So what about rivers? I've been doing a lot of work studying the water systems of the West. And one of the things that's really hard when you're mapping them is that water follows gravity. And in a very rocky, mountainous place, it means that all the water is all smashed together, very close together, and it's very hard to get a sense of how the network works. So here, it's all sort of spread out. And the thing I love is my first reaction was like, well, there's no cities. I mean, why would the cities be right on rivers? And then that's, I don't know, a little bit of human civilization, I guess, in history. So I found this actually very useful as someone who's trying to get to know the geography of the West, especially the rivers. Especially because, honestly, our maps, as we typically use them, don't really pay that much attention to physical features. Maybe mountains, but rivers not so much. Again, Berg Design, these are the people who did the Inception thing. This is where you could plot, how many of you seen this? You could plot major events in human history, especially disasters, on your own house and see where you would fit. This is the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, that big hunk of plastic that's swirling around in the Eastern Pacific Gyre. So if I put it on my house in California, it would extend all the way out to practically halfway to Hawaii. Martin Wattenberg again. This is 1998. This is really early on. This is done in Java. It's called the Map of the Market. This was a tree map that broke up all the sectors of the Manhattan excuse me, the New York Stock Exchange. And this is all fed by live data. And in fact, he thought it was just kind of a cool way to see the stock market. But then when the data feed broke one day, he got calls from all these panicked brokers. And people were really using it. And then this is, I think this is a really great one. This is the jobless rate for Americans. That breaks up a universal number, which was around, I don't know, 11% at the time, I think. This should be animated, actually. Maybe I have to hit next or something. But anyway, you could slice and dice it by different demographic groups, and you could see that the jobless rate could actually go from 3% to 50%, depending on what your demographic group was. So that's the remix. And this next one, this is more like basically creating a database front end that has a visual element. And so you can search records, you can explore, you can look for patterns, and hopefully mark them and share them. So I call this an environment for exploration. This is the New York Times took, the decennial census of the US and plotted like every single block, like, you know, hundreds of thousands of data points showing where every person in the US lived in clusters. And what happened was they had a URL string so that when you interact with it, it would save the state of the visualization in the URL bar. So if you were to send that to somebody else, they would see exactly what you saw. And then people started doing this to annotate it, to say, here's something really interesting I saw. And they would send it around, usually in Twitter. And then Times said, well, why don't we collect those best tweets in here? And then you can click directly to not what the editors chose, but what the readers chose. And this is another crazy visualization from the Google Creative Arts team. They did this for an NGO in Brazil that was looking at, I guess it's not linked, was looking at arms sales around the world. And we actually used this as sample data for a much less dramatic visualization. But at the same time, this is really exploratory as much as it is explanatory, because you know you can see certain things, but you have to really work with it. So, but I haven't really talked about storytelling. I mean, I think there's an emotional impact, there's an intellectual impact to those things, but or explanatory reporting. You know, how do those fit into this? And in order to explain that, I'm going to have to back up a little bit and tell you and talk about myself and Bill Lane. Bill Lane was a man of the West. His family published Sunset Magazine, which is the Bible of Western lifestyle. Can everybody hear me? Like if you wanted to know where to go hiking on a weekend in Nevada, or how to grill mahi-mahi, you would read Sunset Magazine. 10 million readers a month. So they made a big fortune on that, and they endowed the center that I work at, which is founded by David Kennedy, who's a pretty prominent American historian. The idea is Western North America is a place that is very, very high altitude, very, I mean most of it, high desert, strained resources, but everybody in America is moving there, and not everybody, that's a very broad statement, but they think that the population will shift west by mid-century, and this is right at a time where climate change means maybe we won't have enough water for the things we already do. And so it's a huge engineering, social science, political challenge that we have. And so what my center tries to do is work with people in a lot of different disciplines, both to come up with strategies for the future, but also to engage the public, and that's where I come in. My background is as a journalist, and I work both to create stuff that we publish directly to the public, but also especially by collaborating with journalists to do interactive projects that then get published on their sites, so we can leverage their audience. My background, I worked at ABC News, I worked at the New York Times for about 8 years. This is me trying to be a video journalist. I have a frame from my video of this guy taking this picture of me. It's classic media self-referencing. I got started at ABC News. One of the first things I did was a news comic book for kids that I still think was actually one of the better things I did. And then, you know, sort of flash-based information graphics about breaking news and things. A lot of politics. And then I got an offer I couldn't refuse. I got invited to work at Le Monde in Paris to bring some of the techniques we developed at the Times to the Francophone world. And it was there that I started to do more and more work doing graphics that were driven by data sets. And I realized along the way that my ambitions were beyond my abilities, and that I'd been in the business long enough to see the practice that I do change in a way that made me wish I could go back to school. And I was very fortunate in that sense that when I applied for a fellowship at Stanford, I got it, and I was given a year to study whatever I wanted. And so I gorged myself on database management, on geographic information systems, courses on data visualization, with people who were developing some of the new techniques that we're using, stats. While I was at it, I also interviewed a lot of the people who had done work that had influenced me, not necessarily journalists, people who I wondered, well, why are they doing these artful, animations and things like that. And, out of that, I made an hour-long documentary that I put in this sort of flash player here that as you were watching, you might see a visualization, wonder what it is, then it would show you down here what it was and how you could get to it. And that can be found at datajournalism.stanford.edu. So let's watch a little bit.
We are research scientists here at IBM. Our research agenda is around visualization of data visualization. More specifically, we're interested in democratizing visualization. So that means bringing it out to the web and making it available to everyone and anyone.
One of the things that we're doing right now is a sort of a big online experiment called Many Eyes. And this is kind of the living laboratory that we're using to do a lot of our research. It's a site online that anyone can go to. It's up in public. And for free, you can put your data up and visualize it. So you can, if you have an Excel spreadsheet sitting around with something of interest, or you can write something up in a little word processor, you can just put it on our site, and then you can apply a bunch of fairly sophisticated visualizations to see if you can see new things in it.
Basically, half of our brain is hardwired for vision. Vision is the biggest bandwidth that we have in terms of sensory information to the outside world. So what visualization is doing is that it's just taking advantage of the fact that we are so programmed to understand the world around us in terms of what we see.
I think the best way for people to learn about visualizations is to make them. It's the same way that people learned about typography and desktop publishing, by actually having at their hands a whole bunch of fonts to try. And there were some ugly results at first, but now people are actually pretty good at it.
Thing that you're trying to do with visualization, where you're taking data that may be very basic, may be very mundane, and instead you're trying to turn it around and turn it into something that's a little bit different, or put a different perspective on it, outside of just the sense of, well, it's a lot of numbers and it's very complicated, and what can we do to kind of either get across that sense of wonder, or more important for me personally is trying to get people more curious about the particular topic.
So you met there Martin Wattenberg and Fernanda Viegas, who started Many Eyes, which was one of the first sort of collaborative visualization tools on the web. And then after that, they left to go to Google, where their work is not as prominent, but you see it show up like the network graph tool in Fusion Tables. If you've used that, that's them. So there's this, and Ben Fry was the second fellow who was speaking, and he developed a processing framework for generative visualization, which is used for data visualization, but also by artists, and he's a fascinating guy. They're sort of on the research side of things. They're not so much on the journalism side, but I think they are some of the people who helped found this current movement. I mean, data visualization and charting and information analysis go back a long way, but I think the current generation of interactive visualization really comes from those folks. So there's a lot of excitement about data visualization. This is another person I spoke to from Stamen Design in San Francisco, who thinks that data visualization is becoming a medium of its own. You can use to tell stories. But at the same time, it's drawn from a lot of sort of cutting-edge research into graphics APIs and statistical analysis. So for example, you can take something very simple and make it look very complicated, and I don't mean that as a criticism, but this is a song that is, I don't know if you remember the Beverly Hills Cop movies. So That looks a little more like Beethoven to me. He did Beethoven too. This is the internet. This is a map of the internet, I think from about 5-6 years ago. This is cross-references in Bible verses. This is called an arc diagram. The beginning of one arc ends at the point where there is either a connection or a repeat. You can see music visualized this way, and it's pretty effective. So, is that a communication medium? It depends who you ask. So, my video, one of the questions it seeks to explore is how are journalists using data visualization? Since we like to think of ourselves as storytellers, we try to engage people, inform them, explain.
So in media, I'd say we're always excited to see what the New York Times is up to. They are pushing the envelope. It's great to see that they are actually putting out some visualizations that are quite sophisticated, that we can see they trace back all the way to academia.
I mean, charts are data visualization. So we've been doing data visualization, and many other people have been doing it for a long time. What we're doing now, and the way that data visualization as a discipline, that's kind of evolving and growing. It's a little bit different from what we've been doing in the past.
I was very impressed when they had the Voronoi diagram of all the little pieces of the economy.
The data by nature is hierarchical, right? And so like you have, food and then meat and then types of meat. It's also things you can relate to, like as opposed to inflation being a abstract, weird concept. Just by the structure of the data, it was pretty clear that a train map would be a good solution. And there's well popular software now to make square tree maps. It seems sort of unfriendly and unsatisfying. And so I just started looking around for people who have done different things. Michael Balzer, who's at the time he was doing a postdoc in Germany, and that was what his research was about. So I reached out to him for some help.
So that is Amanda Cox, who maybe some of you have heard of. She's known as the queen of information visualization. And she's really something. She's a different type of person. I mean, granted, there's always been people who are statistics savvy or numbers savvy, but she has a degree in applied mathematics, and she came to the New York Times as an intern and sort of blew them away with her ability to analyze and manipulate data, and especially her use of the software package R that statisticians use, and as an open source project that is, can do incredible things in terms of making graphic forms out of information. So she's been sort of a game changer, just herself, in terms of how her skills have spread out within the graphics team at the New York Times, and how she's inspired envy or the desire in other news organizations to think, well, we need an Amanda, we need someone who can help lead us through this. We've got this avalanche of data to deal with, and it's hard. And some of you are probably in this room who are just the right people for this. BBC, another August organization. Now this is a couple years ago, and they have made a number of changes, and they've sort of reorganized their team. But still, we have this problem that hasn't answered the question: how do we tell stories with it? People like Nigel Holmes here, who used to be the graphics director of Time magazine, is a renowned illustrator and infographics designer. He's understandably skeptical about some of the stuff you see in books like Data Flow, which are very beautiful but sort of abstract visualizations. I argue that those are more the throw-it-on-the-wall kind of sketchbook visualizations, but he's emblematic of a debate that goes on within the information graphics world about whether we're really serving the public by doing these sort of abstract data visualizations. And partly this is a community that is composed of people who also do 3D illustration. They do sort of more organic type stuff. So anyway, here, this is the scene in Pamplona at the conference.
Marathons is the most important news infographics gathering in the world. Has existed for the past 18 years, and every year here in Pamplona, in Spain, a lot of infographics people from all over the world gather and party, but at the same time they also talk about graphics, and it's really interesting. It's an awards thing, but it is also also a summit where everybody shares ideas and attend conferences or presentations.
Vamos a estar abajo cero y mañana a 22 grados.
Unfortunately, infographics is something that is usually dominated by fashion. And the fashion that is going on right now, the one that is winning more awards right now, is strange visualizations and strange looking graphic forms.
So then hierarchy is an important factor in graphics. Like people show you this fantastic spiral including tons of data, 20 years worth of data about traffic incidents. And here's tweets. This is people saying good morning around the world. And you think, wow, this is really great. This tells me something about traffic incidents over the last 20 years. But then you realize it doesn't really. It's just this incredible looking image.
Whereas in the past, I think there used to be a lot more sort of narrative illustrated graphics. Now we're definitely seeing a big move toward more just statistic-rich, data-driven pieces.
Tenemos con nosotros a Hannah Fairfield, que es editora de infografía y gráficos del New York Times en la oficina de Washington.
So I wanted to take some risks. I wanted to take some design risks. And so I started thinking about how these variables are interrelated. So you can see that the height is whether or not people are able to pay or not pay oranges, and the color is how many supplement mortgages are.
When you talk us through it, it's wonderful. I'm with it. I'm really understanding the whole graphic as well as you have, and we built it. I worry, my editors worry, about are we taking the readers with us or are we losing them behind?
I knew that my readers were going to need a little bit of help with that. And so right up front, I said, how to read the chart.
Last year's Best of Show graphic, for example, is a strange looking visualization. It's like a string of colors that encode the ebb and flow of movies, how several movies did in the box office. It was published by the New York Times, and it's really attractive, it's really beautiful. It's graphically just gorgeous, and I started trying to read it, I couldn't understand anything.
Lee Byron was here a couple years ago. He's joined Facebook now, but he's, the movie graphic was that was his code.
So the technique that was in the movie box office visualization is, I think, the term that Lee came up with was a stream graph. It's a very beautiful, flowing graphic, and in many ways it illustrates the kind of compromises you have to make in a visualization. First of all, it drew people in and got a whole lot of attention. It was also very good at showing sort of the overall shape of the data. But it did that by making a compromise in the sense that any individual time series in this, looking at the box office receipts for one particular movie, that was harder than in a more traditional graphic.
I mean, it was very shallow. It was really difficult to extract deep meaning from that graphic. At the first level, engaging the reader with a nice looking graphic form, it works. It works perfectly. It really grabs your eye and makes you stop and try to decode it. But after that, it frustrates you.
I think we're just in a phase where we haven't quite figured out how to put these things forward to the average reader. And maybe it's just a transitional phase. I'm sure data visualization will be a powerful tool like many other tools in information graphics. It's just that right now it's become like a cult trend. I mean, some of the people doing it are like rock stars.
The illustrations that used to be so important some years ago is going a bit down in favor of some more synthetic and clear representation of data. Definitely, I think that all infographic artists, we have to evolve a lot, in this statistical area.
They were saying that all Eastern European countries were voting for themselves, and all people were saying this. So I wanted to find out, is it really so? So I got the data from the European Broadcasting Union, and I put it together and started to figure out different ways to visualize it. I'm not sure what it's called, but I wanted to put them in a circle and divide them by East Europe, Western Europe, and those who didn't vote in the contest. So Eastern European countries were voting for themselves, but also the Western European countries were voting for the Eastern European countries.
I think what was recognized is that it was highly interactive, where there are variables, that someone can choose from, and they can decide what they're interested in and then access the data that they're interested in. And it was executed very cleanly with simple strategic color use and, clean typography, nice organization. And I think that's probably what people responded to.
Okay, we can bring the lights back up again. All right, so a debate is forming, but still I haven't answered the question, what are the ways that we tell stories with data? So now I'm going to refer you to something that Jeff Hare and a graduate student who's working with, Eddie Siegel at Stanford, they did a survey of information graphics in the media. And they tried to sort of categorize them in terms of what kinds of techniques they used in order to tell a narrative. And based on that, they came up with a sort of a taxonomy of storytelling formats. I wrote an academic paper about it. This is one of the charts in it. And what they found is that a lot of what drives information graphics and data visualizations is sort of borrowing from other media. With comic books, of course, you've got the use of space. Scott McCloud in his book, Understanding Comics, is a great place to go to get a sense of how people understand narratives and what visual cues do to form a story in our minds. But also they borrow from cinema in the sense of cutting from one visual element to another, trying to create a sense of space, a sense of sequence. And also video games, because video games, you don't really sit down and read an instruction book for a video game, but there's a lot of interaction, so you have to sort of figure out what you're supposed to do. And I actually, this is not a joke, I actually feel like I should play video games more, because I don't very much, and I have a lot to learn from what people are using. So one of the techniques, of course, is just to use space. This is a traditional print graphic. It has a large sort of central point, and then lots of sort of supporting graphics, so-called small multiples. And this is about baseball, again with the baseball. But the important thing is this idea of a stimulating default view. Like from the moment that you open it up, there has to be something that grabs you, gives you a sense of what's going on. And so if you have a visualization that's too abstract, is that going to be stimulating? Another thing is the martini glass. We have the inverted pyramid form of storytelling, where we try to get the main point across as quickly as possible, provide all the context, and then boring, right? So the martini glass, the idea is it's a sort of a very tightly controlled narrative thing at the beginning, but then it opens up to let you explore on your own. So this is a graphic that Amanda Cox did to show how business cycles work, and so it's it's animated scatter plot. And it's pretty dense, but what you can do that really helps you understand this is at the end, after you've been walked through the sequence, you can start to play with it yourself. You have this sort of range slider at the bottom that you can determine how much of the time series you want to show at once, and you can narrow it down and then hit play, and you can see the whole thing go through, and it's pretty cool. So that's the martini glass there, the idea of narrative followed by reference, in a sense. I think that sometimes we read nonfiction books this way. It's like we read it through like a story, but then if you want to refer back to it, you look at the index, you dig things out, and they both have value. The data slideshow, pretty self-explanatory. The idea that it's a series of static or animated steps of information, one after the other. This is a pretty neat graphic that BBC did to show how, despite the terrible loss of soldiers in Afghanistan and Iraq, it was still, of course, a tiny fragment of people lost in Vietnam. And then when Vietnam shrinks down and you see World War II, it provides some perspective. But it's very linear in a sense, one thought after another. This is a visualization we did at the Bill Lane Center for the American West. This is looking at the history of newspapers in the United States, going back to 1690, based on a database from the Library of Congress. And so, obviously part of it is you just want to have the dots on the map, see where things were and when they were. But also, what is the context? And so I did a fair amount of research, and I wrote a kind of a thumbnail history of American journalism. at major steps along the way. I guess around 15 steps or so. One thing that we sort of thought was maybe we would see the decline of American newspaper journalism, but the truth is when you have like 30,000, 40,000 dots on the map at once, it doesn't really make much difference when the Rocky Mountain News, which is a wonderful newspaper, shut down. And one thing you do discover is how many community rural newspapers there are that are still doing pretty well, actually. But you could also see there was the thing about it is it's linear, it's step by step. But within this sequence, you also had the freedom to navigate around it and to click, to zoom in, to interact, and to filter. So here you could see, okay, in the early 1900s there was quite a number of German newspapers as compared to, say, 1950. And part of that was because during World War I, we passed the Espionage Act and some other laws that made it illegal to that brought a great deal of censorship. And then there are also cultural changes. But anyway, so you can explore within this, but there's also a narrative. So you're giving people sort of, if they don't know what they're looking for, just sort of lead them one thought to the next, to the next. That's the URL of that project, if you're curious. And this is a similar thing. This is something we did with the Texas Tribune. This is about an issue that's quite important to us, water. Texas had a terrible drought in 2011. Which preceded the terrible drought that the entire US had in 2012. But the idea here was, this is not a very sophisticated statistical analysis. We were looking at 4 emblematic cities in Texas and comparing them to about, I think it was 12 other cities in the US. And basically, let's look at how they stack up in terms of the water bills they pay. So you can see the Texas cities are highlighted in yellow. So their water bills are relatively low. And we did do correlations on these, we just didn't put the numbers up. Say what you will about that. And you can see that when we go from a typical bill to household usage, you can see how usage is, by and large, much higher. Whereas the amount of rain is pretty well spread out, but then you can see Texas has had terrible drought. So the idea is you're animating from step to step. You're making a point that you're arguing as much with the text as you are with the visuals, but they should speak back and forth to each other. That's right. So that's the data slideshow. Linear sequence, heavy use of annotation, headline writing. Drill down stories, another pattern they found. Basically, you lay out a whole bunch of points and then people choose what they're going to click on. Pretty self-explanatory, and then even within that you can drill down further. Very good for, say, a large population if you want to serve different communities, that they can like start at the national level and then drill down. And then you've also got your data table underneath, so it's not just a spatial representation, but also this was an analysis of the stimulus that MSNBC did a few years ago. The idea of find yourself in the data, drill down to the point you get to yourself, make it relevant to individual people. And then of course, I guess this is where it's animated. So this is in a sense also, you could choose your demographic profile and then see what the unemployment rate was for people like you. The thing that I think would make this a lot better, of course, is if they kept updating it, because we have new unemployment figures every month, but this is now like 3 years old or something like that. So.
The first thing to...
Well, next thing I want to show is a format called video graphics, and it's just what it sounds like. It's basically taking an animated sequence, providing a narration or no narration over it, and then just letting it play. It certainly has the simplest user interface you can imagine, just play, pause, rewind.
The first thing to understand about television is how dominant it is. These days there's a lot of talk about online video and how it's exploded. It is indeed growing. 2 years ago, the average American watched about 2 hours of online video per month. Now they watch 3.5 hours. This is websites like YouTube and Hulu, as well as the media companies' websites, MTV.com, CBS.com, and so on. That's pretty impressive until you compare it with television. People may be looking at that chart and thinking, I don't watch that much television. Perhaps, but one of the...
I love that. It's partly the arch English narration that Americans react to. Hans Rosling, the famous public health researcher who does these wonderful TED Talks and other various appearances where he sort of jubilantly describes the advances that human societies have made. So BBC took him and had him basically act out human development in dance, and then they added in through blue screen sort of this animated visualization on top of it. Not very practical if you want to do this regularly or to update it for breaking news, of course. A lot of overhead. And of course, there's this whole genre now of almost like, in a sense, you know, going back to that whole question of, I don't know whether it's like these from above videos are meant to be like, to show them because it's new information and it's sort of cool that we can know all this stuff, or whether it's a remix because now we're getting to see stuff that is kind of boring when you think about it, but when you see it, it's really cool. I don't know. It's a category killer. Of course, a lot of you have probably seen this. And this visualization is really interesting. This is about when you send an email from your tractor. This is how it travels.
Die 1,5 uur lang achter een zaaiende boer aanloopt.
Yeah, so the email is now going over. I don't know exactly how this works, but
hij maakt slim gebruik van onze sporen.
It seems really inefficient to me.
De thermiek boven de spoorlijn Deventer-Zutphen.
And then, oh wait, but it didn't know the email address. So now it's looking for, it's searching different. But it looks cool, right? What? Oh no, I'm just kidding. Actually, that was a joke for the benefit of the Dutch speakers here, Flemish speakers. Yeah, this is a stork. The scientists tagged it with a thing that's, you know, tracked its location, and then the scientists gave this data to a like Hollywood quality special effects house, who then used the data to blow our minds. And it is cool because basically the stork is following the tractor around because it's kicking up all the flies and stuff like that, and they're eating them. Is that what they're eating, or? And then it flies over the tracks because it likes the thermals from the hot rails. Anyway, but yeah, I mean that's great, you know, but it's not necessarily a model that we can, you know, practically apply to the work that we do, except when you think about what Google is doing with the universe visualization, and all that's running live in your browser. The whole thing is loading this data, and then your browser is making it happen like a PlayStation. You know, the graphics are so powerful that it may be that in a couple of years, like, you'll actually, you know, you'll check your bank balance with something like that, and you'll be like, oh, you spent a lot on pizza this month, you know? So I wouldn't rule it out. At least pizza. I know we'll still have pizza. Other things that are, you know, much more mundane, just like how you write your headlines. This is a story we did with Harper's Magazine that was about a German aristocrat who became a master cartographer, and he was one of the first, part of the first white expeditions to travel to the Grand Canyon. And he was considered a great map maker, but a dunce when it came to his landscape drawings. And like, well, how could someone misread the Western landscape so completely? So what we do is we try to basically destroy his reputation as you click through this thing by showing what a fool he is. This is not the slightest degree like this place. A picture of the artist's dismay. It shows, okay, this is his engraving, and this is what this place looks like. I think there's even more egregious examples. Like first of all, he didn't notice the Hoover Dam. Hello. Then we say, but he actually was in the same area not 5 years earlier. Not the same area, you know, 500 miles. I mean, what was that in those days? A month, maybe? We look at a different expedition he was on, where there's another place called, it's on the Grand River at the time it was called, now it's called the Gunnison, and it was a canyon. It was called the Canyon of the Grand. And this is actually just cool. The reporter I worked with on this went with a photographer to these sites and lined up the vistas and basically rephotographed them to prove that the place that he really took these pictures with, drew these pictures, was about 500 miles away in Colorado. But the point is that, you know, it's about the sequencing, it's about how you frame things. I mean, I could have just labeled them as like, this is this thing, and this is this other thing, this is this other thing. But instead I was trying to, you know, beat the drum, like, here's what I'm trying to get across. I guess that's really character assassination more than narrative technique, but that is a narrative technique, isn't it? This is also like, if you have a complex interface, maybe you can hide a lot of it. We were doing a project with KQED Public Media in San Francisco, and partnering with scientists who were trying to imagine what the San Francisco estuary, which is where two large rivers meet in the Central Valley of California before they fill up the San Francisco Bay, before they meet the sea. And it's really messed up. You know, gold mining, farming, reclamation and channelization and all this stuff has really kind of ruined the ecosystem there. And so these scientists were trying to imagine what it looked like in 1800. And so what we did was we tried to show the evidence that they gathered and how you could understand what this place was like back when it was untouched, or at least managed better. So what it is basically it's like a GIS. It's like a whole bunch of maps of different strata of time, one on top of the other at fairly high resolution. But that's kind of, what we were looking at was one of those maps which is like a big map with a lot of dots on it, the drill down story. And it's like, well, that's kind of overwhelming and it's kind of boring, So what if we put something on top of it so that you didn't really notice the map was actually a real live web map? And so sometimes, and there was this sort of pagination in it. So you could, I don't know why you would ever click on page 14. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. It's not meant to be a way in, but you can click on the links here or this arrow. And as you page through it, it's more like reading a book. So some pages don't have any geographical information at all. Some of them have like information graphics you can interact with. So this is showing, this is marshland from 1800 and this is marshland now. So, here, this is more like a traditional map view. But still, you're just clicking next. Now you're reading about a particular issue that we want to talk about. And now the base map has changed to be these topographic quads from 1915. Another time we might be using the scientific analysis they did. But basically, you just click through these things, and it's just really kind of a layout, like a book, and there's a lot of flexibility in it. And then you get to the end, and you can actually click around it as if you wanted to just look at these things. So a lot of the people who are more interested in the science would actually just go straight to this and then show and hide different layers and sort of explore. So in a sense, it's almost like an ebook, but really it's just another one of those web maps with lots of dots on it. But hopefully the user experience isn't like that. Annotated video. This is a way to take the best of that sort of, the personality and the sort of the drama you get from a. You don't have to dim the lights on this, please.
But according to many experts, the best or the worst, depending on your point of view, is yet to come.
So this is a documentary film we did about energy development in the previously mostly agricultural state of North Dakota. That is now, the western part is now like one of the hottest places in the world in terms of energy development. And so what we did was, this is all HTML based. It's sort of the next step from what I did with the documentary that you were looking at. The idea that you're bringing in supplementary information as you watch the video. I should probably shrink this down so you can see it better. But basically, as the video plays, there's all sorts of supporting information that is there if you want it, and you can ignore it if you don't. But the idea is that as you watch through the video, then you can return to these points and get more information. Or if there's something that we don't go into great detail in the video, you can learn about it. And the other thing you can do is you can expose all of the different annotations at once, like this. And then you can even, when you read that, then you can now skip ahead to that point in the video. And this is part of a sort of growing trend. There's this technology called popcorn. Mozilla just revealed this this UI last week. It's a web application you can use. You load up your video, and then you string it out like a ribbon, and then you can just hang things on it, like it's Christmas or something, candy canes. Now, what that user experience is like is up to you. Do those candy canes show up in front of the video, or are they next to it, or are they below it? It certainly is a recipe for overstimulation, and it can hurt the experience if you don't do it right. But I think that increasingly we're going to see video that is, or media of some kind, whether it's audio or some kind of timer, that's synced with other things that happen on the page. And why is this relevant to data visualization? It may not be yet, but something that I'm pursuing grant funding for is to create a system that would connect an interactive visualization to the time code of a video or an audio playback, so that you could actually have both the benefits of a motion graphics video with the nonlinear interaction of a data visualization. Like, let's say you're watching it and it animates in time with the video, you hit pause, and now you can actually click freely and interact with the graphic. You can search for things, you can zoom in, all that kind of stuff. And I've been calling that data player, unless anybody has a better idea. I think it could be really cool. It's also a lot of work, but I think the idea is that as these tools get better, the things that seem really hard now are going to get easier. hope. User involvement. You could argue that that's another narrative technique. Just real quick, this is a graphic we did at the Bill Lane Center. And we had a thing where if you had comments, you could basically, you could post them, but you could also then link it to a state of the visualization. So people would click that and then they would see what the person saw. A more sophisticated version of this is called Census. Jeff Hare, the HCI professor, computer science professor at Stanford, developed this. The idea here is that you're looking at something a lot like the baby name Voyager, stacked area chart of occupations over time in the US, different jobs. And what you can do is you can draw on it, you can bookmark parts of it, you can comment on other people's comments. So the whole idea is it just becomes like a big bulletin board in a sense. And it's sort of an interesting way that you could promote exploration by your users or within your organization. Prediction, this is a site called Trefis. They have this, it's still Flash-based, this widget. But basically, you look at different companies and how their earnings, how you think their earnings contribute to their stock price. And as you see, as you make your own predictions about how things go in the future, it's actually adjusting the market capitalization of their company. And I think there's something interesting about that. It's partly is that a lot of the methodology is like their own, they're making their own assumptions. Like you have certain variables you control and other ones you don't. But then you can socially share that with other people, with other members. I don't know how this company is doing these days. I don't know if it's really taken off. But it's kind of an intriguing idea. Now, in terms of design, a lot of this stuff I'm showing you is basically, there's this rectangle and then there's stuff going on inside. But of course, especially with the advent of the iPad and the not the demise, but the decline of Flash, a lot of stuff is happening in straight HTML pages. And sometimes the easiest thing to do is just have a really long page and just keep exploring it. But this is this crazy thing that Good Magazine and MTV did for the youth audience to get them engaged in the election and the issues at stake. So this is about energy. And I'm actually not going to show the video because you really see it best when you're interacting with it. Watch this. So I scroll down, and I'm still scrolling down, but now the scrolling is not moving the page. It's now cycling through these different headers. And then I scroll again, and now I'm not scrolling. Now I'm just cycling through this thing. And here now I'm scrolling. All you do is just go down. And it does all this crazy stuff. So it's like it's almost like PowerPoint or something like that. Now here's where it gets really nutty. I think Edward Tufte would have a heart attack if he saw that, but the graphics group. But I have to admit, it's kind of strangely compelling too. Now, does it go backward when you go up? Hells yeah. But you see that in a lot of news sites where what it does is it frees you in space in a sense. Like when we were doing Flash, like everything always had to fit in the rectangle and everything had to be laid out just so. But now it's like you can make some things bigger, some things are smaller, and you can sort of lay them out and you have a lot more independence. And it's also easier to insert new content. And it's certainly easier to find it because as a user, all you have to do is just go down. You don't have to be like, I'm clicking there, there. Anyway. Another design convention, what's it going to be? Do I remember? Yes, responsive design. Has anybody heard of responsive design, what that means? Basically, we had the iPhone came along, and suddenly we started talking even more about mobile optimized versions of websites. And it's like, okay, so we have a mobile site and we have our regular website. Oh, and we have an app too, right? So now you got 3 platforms. And then the iPad comes out and the other tablets. And it's like, now you're designing a different version for each one. No! Right? So what they've been doing instead, there's this growing movement to create things that basically have behaviors baked into them that work on any device. So here, this is not news. It's purporting to be. This is a campaign graphic for the Obama administration. This is showing the record of job creation under the Obama administration. So he took over from President Bush here, right? And you can click through it, all these steps that he took to improve employment. It's propaganda, right? Okay. But you think that's cool? You think that job record is cool? What about this? As you expand it now, the navigation changes. Now it's a little timeline with these little dots on it. Expand it out again. Now these labels start to show up. It's like this whole thing is completely reformatting itself as you resize it. BostonGlobe.com does an amazing job of that. It's It's much harder to develop these things, to be sure. But when you do it, you've got something that is pretty much like ready to adapt to whatever technology could be thrown at it. I think so, yeah. I think, especially if you're using some kind of off-the-shelf technology, there's a good chance that someone will develop things to help you out. Although WordPress, a lot of WordPress sites, they'll go to a mobile theme sometimes, or the tablet theme, right, with the flipping pages. What does that have to do with data visualization? I think because we want to be relevant on a lot of different devices, and we need to think about how we create our interfaces in a way that they're collapsible, that they're flexible, that they're optimized. We're working on a project right now called EcoWest, which is basically trying to make it easier for journalists and people working in NGOs to find public data about the environment. And so here, this is sort of a UI that we're developing that basically works at a bunch of different sizes and how do you, because graphics require not only visualizations, but they also require annotation and labeling and supporting information. But the idea is when you do this, then it's not just that it works on any device, but it can also go viral because people can embed it in their blog, they can use it as a data quotation to support their argument, in a sense. So you may not get a lot of traffic to your own individual website, but you may be able to help enrich the conversation in a whole bunch of different areas by being a data block quote, in a sense, that's helping elevate the level of discourse, especially because we're planning to keep these updated. So people will plug these into their sites and they can, and you can aggregate it into a dashboard. So the idea here is we're going to create a whole sort of atlas of environmental stats with High Country News, which is a Colorado publication that we're working with. So that's pretty much it from the, the toy show. I'm just going to talk a little bit about what it's like being in academia, because I guess, I described it to Marco as I'm like an embedded journalist. I'm a journalist in residence. That's pretentious. Let's go with embedded journalist. In this place. And it's probably sunny right now, probably about 70 degrees. Even though it's a rainy season, but still. But there's a lot of other things going on there. Development of some of the most influential data visualization techniques. Protoviz was a visualization language that was just emerging when I did my documentary. And only a year later, it was replaced by this, D3, which completely threw away the entirety of Protoviz and replaced it with something even better. Challenging, but really, really powerful and beautiful. And a lot of the best data visualizations you see now are done with D3. Not really going to go into that so much right now. But there's a lot of people contributing to visualization at Stanford. This is a map, this is a visualization of data visualization at Stanford. And that's me down there. So I'm like way out in the eastern spiral arm of the galaxy. This is a story about, it was in the New York Times, writing about the rise of digital humanities. The idea is not just journalists who are struggling with data and ways to effectively analyze it or share it with other people or tell stories with it. But in fact, there's a whole bunch of historians and literature professors who are now dealing with structured data that, how did they get that way? Obviously, we're going back into humanity's back catalog and we're starting to digitize things that were made decades or hundreds of years ago or maybe more. The last frontier, new powerful technologies and vast stores of digitized materials that previous humanities scholars did not have. This is called Mapping the Republic of Letters. This is Enlightenment era intellectuals writing letters to each other. Tried to answer questions like, did people stick to their own language mostly? Did they stick to their own region? And we have letters going, across the Atlantic to Thomas Jefferson, for example. Turkey to Russia. This is a literature prof who's been graphing Shakespeare's tragedies. And he quotes Scott McCloud, I think actually it was somebody else studying comics saying that the definition of the hero is the person with the shortest distance to the maximum number of other nodes. Which is pretty romantic, isn't it? So nice. Railroaded, this is one of my directors, Richard White, wrote a book that turned out to be like a 2,000-page, talk about character assassination, total takedown of Leland Stanford, the founder of Stanford University and the former governor of California, who was one of the octopi, as they were affectionately known, who built the Transcontinental Railroad. And this is a book that is already like a huge doorstop, but it has, more than 2,000 footnotes that include interactive graphics, data sets, only available on the website. And one of the interface conventions we came up with was just type in the page number you're on, and it'll take you to that. But it's built on Drupal, and it's a module so that people can reuse it for other things. So it's interesting to just see how this stuff that we're dealing with is there are both, we can be heartened to know that the techniques that we use are being used in academia and other places, but also they're up to things that we can learn from. They do sort of investigations. It's a little bit after the fact. This is looking at injuries in railroad accidents in Colorado. Good public interest journalism. Everyone's dead. No. Yeah, because this is like 1884. This is looking at the composition of railroad boards of directors in 1872 to 1894. It's a time series. So they did some cool stuff, and especially in Flash, that sort of borrowed from the techniques in journalism. Spatial History Project is the name of that. And one last thing I want to talk about, which is that I've been talking about spatial data, I've been talking about quantitative data, but then there's sort of more mushy data, like the data you find in books or newspapers, natural language. As investigators, you're going to deal with large document dumps, either in electronic format or scanned or MOCR. And finding out what's in those things is hard. And as you know, especially with the WikiLeaks cables, the State Department cables. I mean, that's a tremendous challenge, especially if you've only got like a week or 2 weeks before the embargo ends to figure out what's in those things. So this is a guy at the University of California, Irvine, who basically took the Pennsylvania Gazette, which was a newspaper published by Benjamin Franklin, and he did this thing called topic modeling. He took all the words in it and saw which words are most frequently co-occurring, and then he gave those labels and said, these are topics. And so he could see, this foreshadows the American Revolution because they're complaining about tariffs, and they're complaining about the Stamp Act and things like that. This is somebody who looked at Civil War era newspapers, University of Richmond, Virginia. And, comparing, a lot of what he did was comparing the rhetoric used on either side of the Civil War. And one thing he found is oftentimes you find something that confirms what you thought, which is that the North and South hated each other. This is a graph showing the difference between ads for finding either employees or fugitive slaves. So if you had an escaped slave, you could write an ad in the newspaper, maybe in the Mac. It's pretty gruesome. We worked with the University in Texas to look at a group of 180 years of newspapers. The first thing we did was a lot of them were scanned really horribly. The originals were almost illegible. So we had a thing that let you sort of explore where they're, look for gold basically, because some of the stuff you couldn't do any kind of text mining on because it was illegible. And then after we did that, we did a thing that lets you explore the results of natural language processing that we did. We did 3 kinds. One was looking for the most commonly occurring words, the most commonly occurring names, places, and organizations. And then this thing called topic models, which basically takes co-occurring words and clusters them and says, this is a subject. And the idea was, one of the things we found is there was this little-known battle at San Jacinto in Texas in the 1800s that was regarded as not that important, but it turned out to be like a 9/11 for Texans at that time. And we talked about it constantly for decades afterwards. And so this is kind of an interesting insight. And part of it is, why do this? Why not just read them? Because it's not impossible. It would take you years to read these things. And so this kind of mass machine reading, on one hand, to gain insight, or at least to create a heat map, so then you can find this clue and then say, okay, now I'm going to read the real thing, like if you're doing investigation, can greatly speed the time it takes to get these things done. But what was I going to say? Yeah, well, that's. I'll leave the other thought for the next hour of the presentation. And just to draw this back to journalism, Jonathan Stray, who's I forget what his title is now, but he's basically doing data journalism at the Associated Press. He has been a very strident advocate of finding better ways to do natural language processing and to visualize it and find ways to explore it. And he took the Iraq war logs and he did this network analysis of the language in it. And I still don't quite have a good grasp on how these visualizations work or what they're telling us. And I know that that's partly my fault, and it's partly the challenge of the people who create them. But it may be that we have to get smarter as a culture and as an industry to figure out how to make sense of these things and tell stories that come out of this. So this is our homework right here. Yeah, all that and homework too. So anyway, that's basically it. Here's my particulars. if you want to get in touch. And I have about a couple of seconds for questions. Well, too late.